Welcome back. All right. So, in the midst of being called a negative Nelly about the current status of the Vancouver Canucks and their trade deadline and what's been done so far, and I know we've still got a little over 24 hours till it's done, and they may still have a lot of irons in the fire, but I'm stuck trying to figure out what the plan exactly is. So when Rick Tocchet was hired, he said the word rebuild, and I was like, all right, somebody said it out loud, rebuild. All right. So what do you do when you're rebuilding? You cut back on your expenses, you pick up draft capital, and then you try to keep your young core together. Now, an example I would use is Clayton Keller in Arizona. Would Keller like to be winning right now? Absolutely. But Clayton Keller is the guy that they decided, we're building around this guy, we believe in this guy, and they sold him on their vision. The Vancouver Canucks are going to need to do something similar for Elias Pettersson when this summer rolls around and they can talk extension with him. Now, Pettersson's going to be expensive. Right now he makes $7.35 million. That's the cap hit until next summer, so 2024, where he's a restricted free agent. Now, he can do one of two things. Either get walked to unrestricted free agency with a short-term deal, or he can go ahead and dive in and go long-term with Vancouver. Now, in the event that he decides, I'd rather not stick around long-term with Vancouver, he ends up being in the same position as, say, Timo Meier was with San Jose this year, where you kind of have to move the player. And so that's something the Canucks need to avoid having happen. They can't afford to lose Pettersson. I will agree with that. They also need Quinn Hughes to be happy, right? $7.85 million is his cap hit until 2027. So there's no rush with Hughes, but you don't want to be wasting these years either. And I understand that sentiment. But when Tocchet's hired and he sits down at that press conference and says the team's going to do a rebuild, well, a rebuild means you're going to start cutting back on expenses, right? And you're going to pick up draft capital. Now, the trade yesterday for Hronek gave away some draft capital. And all I keep seeing from some is, well, there's no guarantee with draft picks. Sure, let's trade all the draft picks then. If you believe that there's no guarantee with draft picks, trade all of them. And I'm not there. Now, I did the video on how, draft picks can be overvalued. Absolutely. But still, first rounders are normally National Hockey League players. I'll get into this over here as well. So right now, when you look at their forward group, and I just wanted to talk about the guys on pricier contracts. So you got Boeser at $6.65 million until 2025. He admitted to the press that, this deadline seems to be a little bit more serious in terms of whether or not he's going to be traded. I don't know that he gets traded at the deadline. I get the feeling Pittsburgh was probably in on him. I know Minnesota would love to have him. They don't have the cap space to bring in a cap hit like that for 2 more years, meaning the Canucks would need to retain salary. Not an optimal experience, right? Chychrun goes to Ottawa in part because Arizona doesn't have to retain any salary. And so for Boeser, it's a tough spot. He knows he's on a team where I don't think he's had a very good year. I think he's had some good moments here and there. I think there's a better player that will emerge once he's been traded, but it's a matter of when that happens. JT Miller's extension kicks in. It's $8 million a year till 2030. Garland, $4.95 million till 2026. I think it's highly likely the Canucks are going to try to move Boeser and Garland this summer, which would save them about $11 million in cap space right there. But then there's the matter of what do you get back, and if you're just trading out money to get cap space, you normally have to throw in a draft pick to make teams go for that. So you have to give up more of your draft capital to get yourself out of the mess that either you created for yourself or that Jim Benning left you with. However you want to look at it, and a lot of this is still what Jim Benning's left the team with, right? Then you've got Kuzmenko, his extension, $5.5 million till 2025, meaning Miller and Kuzmenko will cost the team $13.5 million of the $83.5 million cap. And there's the discussion of, if they traded Kuzmenko, I think, honestly, if they traded Kuzmenko, they probably would have got back a couple of second-round picks. I don't know that they would have got a first. They might have. It depends on which team you're dealing with and all that. But at any rate, it's done. Kuzmenko's signed. He's sticking around. The asterisks on this, the blue asterisks, are for players 25 years of age and younger, which I'll get into because that's an important part to look at. Then you've got Tyler Myers, $6 million cap hit for 1 more year. But he has a $5 million bonus that gets paid out on July 1st. And then after that, it's only a $1 million cost. So if you have a team that wants to get to the cap floor or a team that doesn't mind a cap hit, especially when they're not only paying $1 million in salary, Myers might be a good fit. But again, for the Canucks to move the Myers contract, it may involve moving a future asset like a prospect or a draft pick too. There's the OEL contract, which is buyout proof. That's $7.26 million till 2027. So that's $26 million in cap between Miller, Kuzmenko, Myers, OEL. The Kuzmenko one's forgivable, absolutely. But this is where, like, it all dates back to my anger when the Canucks picked up OEL and Garland. And there were fans then that said, I don't care about the draft pick going the other way. We finally got rid of 3 terrible contracts, and we like Garland and we like OEL, and we're going to go for the playoffs. And it hasn't worked out. It hasn't worked out. And Garland's on the market. I think if they could trade OEL, I think they would. But this is where we're at, right? So now Hronek's under a very team-friendly contract of $4 million for next year. But then he's a restricted free agent. And if he keeps trending into that 50-55 point range for a defenseman, that's going to put him into, you would think, at least the $7 to $8 million a year cap hit starting in 2024. So it's a really cheap deal for 1 year. But this year coming up, I don't think we're seeing the Canucks as a contender. So yes, adding Hronek may very well keep Quinn Hughes somewhat happy, and it might improve the defensive numbers, meaning they might win more games between now and the end of the season than we'd expected, thus meaning they pull themselves further away from potentially ending up. And it's not just Bedard. It's having a top draft pick. It's having one of the top 5 draft picks in what's considered a very deep draft. So this move may very well take them further away from that, while other teams who are in that same range as the Canucks in the standings are trading guys off, knowing, hey, this season's not going to happen for us. We want draft capital, and we want to give ourselves the best opportunity to potentially land a star player in this year's draft. Now, in that, you've got Demko, $5 million cap hit till 2026. And in his return, Demko looked like Demko, right? So I don't think there's any need to necessarily move Demko. And at the same time, Demko being Demko means they're going to win some games. He's going to win some games for them. And on LTIR, you've got Mikheyev, $4.75 million until 2026. You've got Pearson, who may not play again, $3.25 million for 1 more year. And you've got Pullman, who also may not play again, $2.5 million till 2026. So that's, about $5.5 million between Pearson and Pullman that ends up on LTIR. And during the offseason, it throws you off a little bit. Mikheyev should be ready to go for the upcoming training camp and ready for next season. But again, questions I think are there about how this team's put together and what is the plan. So next year is the plan for the Canucks to try to make the playoffs. The Hronek deal tells me it may very well be that during the offseason we're getting told, yep, playoffs. Now, 25 and under is important for teams that are on their way up, like Ottawa, Buffalo, for Detroit. These teams have a lot of good young players, and they're learning to win together, and they're growing together. And whether these 3 teams make the playoffs or not, the fact is, all 3 of them are seen as being on, the improving side of things, right? Now, 25 and under for the Canucks, you have Podkolzin. Book's still out on what Podkolzin's going to be. Amon is a 4th liner. Kravtsov's a restricted free agent. There's some speculation about him wanting to go over to the KHL. And if he does, well, between now and then we can see what he can do, and maybe they can talk him into sticking around. Ratu, who was acquired from the New York Islanders. Studnicka, who was acquired from the Bruins. Ethan Bear, who was acquired from Carolina, restricted free agent. Höglander, who's been in the minors most of the season. Klimovich is still in Abbotsford as well. Johansson, who they believe is NHL ready. So Philip Johansson may end up making his way over to play with the team this season. At the very least, he should be playing for the Canucks next season. And then in goal, you have Silovs. The one question mark is this. So they've been adding a lot of these young talents. What is the ceiling for these young talents? Is there that blue chip prospect? And I don't know that there is. And their top prospect is still kind of Lekaramaki, who they drafted last year and has had a really rough year. It was a nightmare of a season. And so his draft stock, if we were redrafting right now, I don't think he would have got taken by the Canucks at 15th. I don't think he would have. So one of my concerns with the Canucks is that you've got a team that's already over next year's cap. You've got a team that needs to trade money, and other teams know they need to trade money. So that's going to make things more difficult. And you've got some bad contracts in here, right? But they're still going to win enough games that they're going to stay above that bottom end where, you'd get those top 5 draft picks. So this year's draft, they have a first round pick. They don't have a second. They almost never seem to have a second. They don't have a second next year either. So both second round picks this year and next year are gone. They've got one first this year and next year. What did the Ottawa Senators do that helped to put together this pretty good core? They had 3 first round picks in 2020. And all 3 of them look like they're going to be very solid National Hockey League players. So that's an issue right there. They have 2 third-round picks this year, Vancouver does, 3 fourths, and a 6th. They don't have a 5th, they don't have a 7th. So, as I always say, in order to win a lottery, the more tickets you have, the better chance you have. That's 1, 3, 6, that's 7 draft picks. So your standard 7 picks out of a 7-round draft. The one thing that I always find interesting, too, is that people will say, well, there's no guarantee, and, well, you're drafting guys, and So it almost sounds like people have decided, well, the Canucks drafting is usually kind of crap anyways, so, there's no guarantee. Whereas teams that draft well usually end up being pretty good teams. That's how you build your dynasty. The idea of building a Stanley Cup, building a dynasty, go look at teams like the Hawks and the Kings and ask yourself how many of these guys were homegrown, how many of them were draft picks, and not necessarily just in the first round. I talked about it with the Chicago Dynasty. I'll do a video on the LA Kings as well. You can even talk about the Oilers back in the 80s, the Islanders in the 80s. Any dynasty, any team that's dominated, Tampa Bay as well recently, right? These teams have homegrown talent. They know how to add to that talent, but they know when as well, right? And so this was just more of a move that I thought, Hronek seems like it's an odd timing move to me. And again, understanding that, Hughes needs a defense partner and all, it just seems kind of odd. So, 2022, the Canucks had 6 picks. 2021, they had 6 picks. 2020, they had 5. So remember, there's 7 rounds in the draft. And in those years, 2020, they did make the playoffs. But the picks they traded out, we'll see how much that hurts them later on, right? Now, the first pick they had this past year was Lekaramaki at 15. The previous year, Klimovich was their top pick. He was 41st overall. The year before that, Yanni Yermo was their first pick at 82. So while the Canucks were in a position to go towards the playoffs and had a nice little run there before Vegas brought it all to an end, were they a team that should have been trading out of the first and second round? No. I would say the years following proved that the answer to that was no. This was a mistake to trade out of the first and second round. 2019, they had 9 picks. Bud Colson's drafted 10th overall that year. Quinn Hughes is drafted 7th overall in 2018. And 2017, they draft Pettersson 5th overall. They had 8 draft picks that year. But they've never really had like what Arizona, Ottawa, Buffalo teams have had. Didn't Ottawa have like 12 picks not that long ago in a draft? And it feels like Montreal too. Ton of draft picks for Montreal. And Vancouver should be doing that. Pick up all the draft capital you can right now. And then you sit down with Pettersson, you sit down with Hughes if you have to, and you say, here's what we're doing. We're going out, we're scouting as much as we can. We're going to get all of these guys at the draft that we can get. This summer, we're going to go out, we're going to save some money by not bringing in anybody with money and term and all that. And we're going to try to make the team competitive for next season. But for this year's draft looks great. We're going to try to get as many pieces as possible. And I don't think that a player would have a problem with that. I don't think that your star player would have a problem with you selling them on the idea of, hey, so we want to make this team a potential champion down the road. And in order to do that, you need to draft, you need to develop, and you need to have guys on your roster who are on entry-level contracts. Entry-level contracts are gold. You look at teams that are consistently good, and usually you'll have 1 or 2 guys who are on entry-level contracts. You might have more that are depth guys who make less than $1 million a year. And it's a balancing act, right? So, the traded draft picks in recent history for Vancouver, they traded the number 9 draft pick to get the OEL and Garland contracts, and of course to get rid of 3 bad contracts of their own, which were expiring in a year, I might add. And that number 9 pick became Dylan Guenther. In 33 games for Arizona this year, 6 goals, 9 assists, 15 points. He's producing very well for the Seattle Thunderbirds since getting sent down. And Guenther looks like he's going to be a top 6 player in the National Hockey League. The Canucks would be so much in a much better position, I think, if they had Gunther in their system, because that's an entry-level contract. Then you don't have Garland at 4.95. You don't have OEL at 7.26. That's $12 million in savings. Doesn't mean they'd be $12 million under the cap. It means they'd have Gunther in their prospect pool, and you have that money you can spend elsewhere as well without giving up that asset. 2020, the number 20 pick that they gave up, Shakir Mahatmadulan, so he was traded recently, his rights were. 6'4", 195 pounds. He's a defenseman, and he's very good on zone entries. And he's seen as a fascinating prospect at this point. One that may very well come over and play next season and could be very good. So there's a big defenseman. He doesn't play big, like he doesn't use the physicality side of it as much. But Mahatmadulan's supposed to be an NHL level defenseman, could be top 4. And then you've got Theodor Niederbach was the other pick they traded, number 51. He's seen as more of a project. There's upside there, skating, something that they see that he needs to work on. But it doesn't mean the Canucks would have had to draft Niederbach. When I see a team trading themselves out of the draft, it's just, to me, unless you're envisioning yourself as a Stanley Cup champ or being in the Final Four and being really close, I'm not sure why that's done. But it does come off as short-sighted. The other thing I've seen is, well, the Islanders draft pick that the Canucks traded, that's just going to be like in the teens, might even be 20th overall, so who cares? All right, so let's go through the drafts from 2015 through to 2021, keeping in mind the 2021 draft, very recent, so you're going to have guys who committed to the NHL next season from that draft as well. 2015, Barzal goes 16th, Connor goes 17th, Shabbat goes 18th, Eriksson Ek goes 20th. Besser goes 23rd. Konechny 24th. So those are pretty good draft picks in that range. 2016, Chychrun went 16th. Fabro went 17th. Tage Thompson went 26th. Now, there's misses in between, too, but if you believe in the Canucks and their drafting, then they wouldn't have those misses, right? 2017, Josh Norris goes 19th overall. Thomas goes 20th overall. He's pretty good for St. Louis, right? Hedl goes 21st overall. He's having a great year for the Rangers. And Ottinger, number 26 to Dallas. Pretty good goaltender. Imagine Demko and Ottinger in net. That'd be fantastic. It'd be expensive too. 2018, a little bit of a less deep draft there in the EGEC. Keandre Miller at 22 and Matthias Samuelsson at 32nd to Buffalo. But still, Keandre Miller at 22, pretty good defenseman. Would be great to have seen Miller in here with the Vancouver Canucks draft picks. 2019, Caulfield went 15th overall that year. Peltier went 26th overall, and Flames fans seem to be quite excited about what he can bring. Kochetkov was drafted by Carolina in the second round at 36th overall. And then in the 2020 draft, which was seen as a pretty deep draft, and so far it looks like it is. You've got Goalie at 16 to Montreal, very good defenseman already. Mercer at 18 to New Jersey, fantastic two-way forward. Braden Schneider to the New York Rangers. Schneider in and out of the lineup here and there, but he's got a lot of upside, and he was 19th overall. And then Peterka, 34th overall to Buffalo. I was surprised at the time he slipped into the second round, and he looks like he'll be a steal for Buffalo in the second round. 2021, already we can see Wyatt Johnston, number 23 overall to Dallas. Looks like he was a steal. And J.J. Mosier, drafted 60th overall by Arizona, a team that's just stockpiled prospects and draft picks along the way. And Mosier, honestly, legit top 4 defenseman in the National Hockey League and kind of a hidden treasure in Arizona. So the idea that trading out of that first round draft pick, who cares? It doesn't matter. It does. In the long-term picture, it does. And one thing that if I was Pettersson, I would be saying is, what is the long-term picture? If he's going to sign an 8-year extension with Vancouver, he's not going to want to know what's going to happen next year. He's going to want to know what is the plan. We have a team that's currently below the playoff line. We have a team that doesn't have a ton in terms of prospect depth. They need to replenish the prospect pool. They also don't have a lot of draft capital, which is going to make it more difficult to replenish the prospect pool. Sure, we can all dream of Bedard. We can all dream of Fantilli, Michkov, Carlson, whoever you want. But the reality is, this team needs depth in its prospect pool. They need to prioritize that. Now, they've gotten a lot of young players. I don't know how many of the young players they have are going to turn out to be great diamonds in the rough. Ratu, I think, honestly, did he deserve to go as low in the draft as he did? Probably not. Was there too much hype around him the year after that? Probably yes. And I think the reality for Ratu is maybe he ends up being a decent third liner in the NHL, right? Kravtsov, how much upside is there? Is he going to be a star player or, in top six forward? Not bad. And again, with Podkolzin, there's still some debate about how good Podkolzin's going to be. Be nice for the Canucks if they had that, okay, this guy's surefire, like they've had with Pettersson and Hughes, both of them early first-round picks. And while the Islanders' pick is likely not going to be that early, even if it's in the 15 to 20 range, there's going to be some pretty good players that are available. And in the end, if we look 4 years down the road and that player is more impactful than Hronek, where are the Canucks going to be? So again, if you're of the mind that the Canucks aren't that far off, they don't need to do very much, okay. But the fact that they're currently over next year's cap is an issue. That is absolutely an issue. LTIR might help them out because you've got Pearson and Pullman. And I don't think with cap friendly, I don't think the LTIR, Pearson, and Pullman would still not be on the books. So, I mean, there's some space there, but not very much. So if you want to see the team improve in the offseason, odds are, unless they find a taker over the next 24 hours for a contract or two, it's going to be difficult. And even if they do, it's going to be difficult. So I guess that's the one question I would have for management. Do they think that, the major surgery that was talked about, the rebuild, are they saying, well, we're going to do that and then they're going to treat it like they're a year or two away from contending? Because I don't know that the Canucks have the roster and have what they need in order to contend that soon. I think that's what you should be doing. Rather than just trying to build a team that can maybe compete for the playoffs, you're trying to build a champion. You're doing your best to build a champion. One thing that I've always said when it comes to Canada not winning Stanley Cups, I think there is a lack of patience with rebuilds in Canada in general. And I don't necessarily mean the fans either. I think the pressure on general managers is high. And I think it leads to sometimes mistakes where maybe you trade out those draft picks and prospects in order to try to get better now. And it costs you that chance to win later. But let me know your thoughts. I wanted to describe and explain myself a little bit after yesterday's trade video with Hronek being a part of the Vancouver Canucks. Still hard for me to say because it's just weird. He's currently injured. He's on the injured reserve, so we won't see him debut for the Canucks now, but apparently he's close to returning, so we'll see when he gets back. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you believe the Canucks are on the right track, everything's fine. Let me know your thoughts. And if you think that they should be picking up more draft capital, more prospects, and trying to trade out guys, let me know your thoughts on that as well. It is fascinating that they're already over next year's cap. I had to check that because I had heard that, and I was like, I got to look. Yep, they're over next year's cap already. So here we are. Let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.